You think you're managing your property maintenance well, when all of a sudden, you're out of reserves. Now you're forced to slap the owners with an unwanted special assessment just to get the project done. This nightmare is real and happens to associations all too often. How does a reserves roadmap help? In this portion of the webinar, we'll give you some examples to help keep you from depleting your precious reserve funds on the wrong projects. And we'll show you how to avoid expensive detours, keeping reserve expenses from spiraling out of control. Part of this comes from understanding the journey a bit better, helping you identify the 5 different types of reserve expenses and what to do when the expenses don't match the plan. And finally, we'll show you how your reserve study helps you know where you are, so you can see if you're on track to have enough reserves or if you need to make some course corrections. Well, now let's get to some actual examples so our audience can make good decisions all throughout the year. And let's start with one of the most common. Is it a reserve expense or an operating expense?
All right. Yeah, good question. So we actually cover that question in an entire webinar in our Reserve Studies 101 program, which you can find on our website or on YouTube. But I'll summarize the answer in the next few slides. So think about it like this. There's a 4-part test that every reserve component must pass. That it's a common area responsibility, that it has a limited useful life, that it has a predictable remaining useful life, and that it is above a minimum threshold cost of significance. Every component in your reserve study needs to pass this 4-part test. But let's get back to the questions you face on a regular basis. And so how do you know if something is a reserve expense or an operating expense? Here's how it works. First, just go ahead and look to see if it's listed in the reserve study. If so, it's a reserve expense.
Hey, Kevin, going to interrupt here. Are you talking about the physical asset itself or project description?
Yeah, right. So if a roof replacement is a line item in the reserve study, cleaning the gutters, for example, on the roof doesn't make it a reserve project. That's just regular normal maintenance. The reserve component is the actual replacement of the roof, not anything related to just ongoing normal maintenance. Next, let's consider if the expense affects the component's remaining useful life. That means a minor service call to a boiler is not a reserve project, but replacing the igniter system that the boiler's remaining useful life by 5 years, that would be a legitimate reserve expense because it extends the life of that component. And then if it truly looks like if a component was missed or is not knowable at the time of the last reserve study, go ahead and check with your reserve study provider. They will help you decide and prevent you from having to guess. And that's a good example of exercising your duty of inquiry from the business judgment rule. And here's another one. Look at the simple but typical reserve component list. All the normal things are here: description, useful life, remaining useful life, and current cost. So suppose your pool heater fails. You see a pool resurface component, the second project on the list, but no pool heater component. From what you just learned, replacing the pool heater, or pool filter for that matter, isn't automatically a reserve expense just because it's related to the pool. Go ahead and check with your reserve study provider. There may be a valid reason why it was excluded, or they may support the expenditure from the reserves and add it to your component list during the next reserve study update. It's almost always not in your best interest to guess. Too many properties gradually deplete their reserves by spending those limited funds on non-reserve projects.
Great. That helps properties not deplete their reserves. But now can we twist that a little bit? And is there something boards and managers can do to help their properties actually save money on the things that need to get spent?
Yeah, sure. That's always a good idea. So like we just talked about, most of your reserve decisions through the year are going to be spending choices, right? Hopefully the funding plan is already set at the beginning of the year. We want to encourage you to spend reserves on the right projects at the right time. Spending reserves effectively avoids expensive deferred maintenance, but not all reserve projects are the same. There's different reserve components and are going to just fail differently. Some are okay to defer, and some you should really do on schedule. It's okay to defer an inconsequential component when cash may be tight. It's okay to stop, not spend reserves, and let that asset fail. That might be an exercise machine in a gym that nobody uses, or a water heater for the pool restroom. It's something that you can live without for a little while. But you want to think twice about reevaluate or obsolescence projects, doing the ones that have true merit for the association and deferring the not needed now projects. It's the protection and catastrophic projects that you want to make sure to do on time. Those are the projects like wood paint and asphalt seal coating that protect the underlying and very expensive wood or asphalt. Or catastrophic projects like the hot water boiler for the building or the entry gate mechanism. Don't delay those. Those are the ones that will get real expensive or cause hardships if you delay. In this case, green means go and get the project done. But just a reminder, no deferred projects save the association any money. Those projects will still need to be done eventually. And you have to be careful. Defer only the safe projects because otherwise you'll just cost the owners a bunch of money. And then always contact your reserve study provider if you have any questions. Now, this next slide is a classic example of a poor decision. Here, a protection project, a board that delayed doing their protective asphalt seal coat, and as a consequence, the expensive underlying driveway has clearly failed. Replacing the driveway cost them anywhere between 10 and 20 times the cost of the seal project that they deferred. And then the same is true for painting ironwork, as you can see, or even replacing a roof, which you can see on this slide. Delaying protection or catastrophic projects are generally a bad idea unless you've reached out to an expert or vendor and have been given advice that delaying is, in that case, okay.
Kevin, you're doing a great job of keeping everyone on track. Glad that you covered those 5 types of failures. Answer me now, what about when the project matches, but when the cost doesn't match?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to be honest with you, it happens all the time. We're planning for reserve expenses that are going to happen 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. It's unlikely that we're going to perfectly estimate what the cost of some of these reserve components are going to be that far down the road. So occasionally, some projects are going to come in over or under what's budgeted in the reserve study. So in this case, first and foremost, just go ahead and do the project. Expect that the extra dollars will either come from other reserve projects or can be redistributed to other projects. The asterisk on that second point there is to let you know that all this happens automatically when using the cash flow method. And then make sure your reserve study is updated with this new information, making your reserve study better every time, over time. So don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. Go ahead and spend reserves, get the project done, and protect the property. Taking care of the property is more important than following your reserve study document. And do what needs to be done, and remember the 4 reserve rules. Delayed projects often get expensive, and that just makes things more expensive for homeowners.
Okay, we talked about costs not matching. What about the replacement itself? Is it ever okay to upgrade a component, making it better or different when it gets replaced? Does that, by definition, make it a capital improvement?
Yeah, great question. So by definition, reserves are not for adding new assets to the association like a new dock or a new tennis court where one previously did not exist. That's the key. But if the asset needs to be replaced, it's totally fine to do a natural upgrade, like you see on the slide, replacing, an older light bulb with another type of light that uses less electricity. So remember, if the asset or project exists already is the key distinction. Remember that reserves offset ongoing deterioration of existing assets. Reserves are not a slush fund to be used to buy new things for the association. If your boards ever have a question on this issue, just feel free to reach out to your reserve study provider for clarification, and they'll be happy to help.
Kevin, you keep saying the same thing, that when you have a question, reach out to your reserve study provider. And I think that's tremendous advice from someone who's busy, because we're in the business of helping our clients make those good decisions throughout the year. Okay, well, let's turn the topic to money. And the big question is if the association has enough. Now, this is another topic that, like with components, we devote an entire webinar to this issue, Reserve Studies 102, which again, you can find on our website or YouTube.
Yeah, that's great. And the major point from that webinar is to measure reserve fund size by percent funded, not necessarily the actual cash balance. Champlain Towers South had about $700,000 in its reserve fund. Now, at first glance, that might sound like a lot until you understand that they had so many reserve projects waiting to be done that they were only about 7% funded. Percent funded tells how well the reserve fund meets the needs of the association at that time. And remember that the cost of deterioration is ongoing. percent funded reveals the result of that funding, if the resulting reserve balance has kept pace with the ongoing deterioration over the years. It's kind of like the world record pace line that you sometimes see in a swim race. It allows you to know how we're doing in comparison. Now, this next chart shows you why percent funded really matters. The chart shows that you can predict most special assessments. You can see them coming years in advance when you look at percent funded. Special assessments are common when the association is in the 0 to 30% funded red zone on the left, but special assessments are infrequent in most of the yellow zone and rare in the green zone. Pretty powerful information, and it's great information for board members to know. So once again, please go ahead and give me a hands raised if you see how percent funded tells you if your association is prepared or unprepared for your upcoming expense. And thanks again in advance for your ongoing participation.
I think what our audience is now thinking, wow, I know how to minimize our special assessment risk. I know how to see how we're doing, but what's it take to adequately fund reserves, offsetting that ongoing deterioration that you're talking about? And on this slide, it shows that typical number is often about 25% of total budget. And you can see that real clearly on this little pie chart, a good visual image for you to remember. Typical reserve funding takes about 25% of an association's total budget.
And another good question after that is why budgeted contributions instead of just special assessing when major projects come up? So with budgeted contributions, every owner pays their fair share of steady, ongoing deterioration over the time they owned a home in the association. The result is that the funds exist when they are needed. Having the funds on hand eliminates costly deferred maintenance. And remember, the future takes care of itself when you take care of proper contributions on an ongoing basis, everyone paying just their fair share. This is the magic of how associations avoid unfair special assessments and expensive deferred maintenance and maximize their property values. This is all part of your roadmap to success. Choosing your words and discussion points carefully is how curb appeal and property values are maximized. That's a successful strategy. All right, so some of you are probably distracted thinking your association isn't close to putting 25% of the total budget aside and wondering if that's even possible. But I'll tell you that reserve funding really is not too expensive. Even 25% of the total budget often works out to about the cost of a premium cup of coffee per day per owner. That's pretty affordable if you ask me. And if somebody says they can't afford it, then I think they're just plain wrong. And besides, another fact is that budgeted reserve funding is the least expensive way to pay for a reserve expense. The expenses are what they are. The only choice you have is how the owners will pay. With budgeted funding for a $250,000 roof project, owners will pay less than $250,000 due to compound interest earned from the bank. A special assessment will pay for the expense. $250,000 special assessment should cover a $250,000 roof. But at current rates, it will take about $320,000 from the owners to pay back a $250,000 loan. And like we said plenty of times before in this webinar, delaying usually gets expensive.
Right. So budgeted contributions are going to cost the owners either less than a special assessment or a loan. I get that. That makes sense. But can you offer some help for boards or managers who still have that 25% number stuck in their head and they're thinking, wow, we need to significantly increase our reserve funding? How do they get started on that path to success?
Yeah, so the general idea is to start raising your reserve contribution a little bit at a time as frequently as possible. And we call it the $10 solution. It likely took these association years or even decades to get into an underfunded jam. So check with your reserve study provider. You usually can take a few years to get out of that jam. Consider raising your reserve funding by $10 per month per owner this year, and then another $10 per month per owner the following year. And just about 2 to 5 years, that's usually all it takes for most associations to raise their reserve funding to a sustainable level.
Right, a little bit at a time. It seems like so much of what we're talking about today is a little bit at a time, making those incremental changes, those incremental improvements, step by step, moving in the right direction.
At Association Reserves, we make the present less stressful and the future more secure. If you want to join us in this mission, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment down below on what you'd like to see us address in a future video. Let's plan for your best future.